back to another episode of Guns and Guitars. I'm Dan, and today we're going to be looking at the KLD JCM DIY Tube amp. This is the printed circuit board variation, and it is a clone of the Marshall JCM 800. So let's go ahead and talk about my experience in building it, as well as, sort of the differences and similarities to an actual Marshall JCM 800, and some real-life sound demos. I'm Dan, this is Guns and Guitars. Let's get started. You guys know me, and you know that I'm more of a bluesy rock player when it comes to guitar, and so the Marshall JCM 800, probably not my first choice of amp. It's a wonderful amp, really cool tone, just not really my style. So really, I only agreed to build and review this amp kit for KLD under one condition, and that's, well, you guys know that I first and foremost am a bass player. And I would love to build a DIY bass tube amp kit, but they don't really exist, at least not for a price that's reasonable. And so if there's one brand that's going to be able to bring us a DIY tube bass amp kit at a reasonable price, it's going to be KLD. So kind of leverage this review against them developing a DIY tube bass kit, and they agreed. So let's go ahead and get started reviewing this, and as soon as that bass amp kit is out, you better believe I am going to test and review it. So I'm very excited for that. All right. Let's get into this. I do want to thank KLD for sending me this DIY tube amp kit as well as the chassis. Now, that's probably the first place I need to start, is that this tube amp kit does not come with a metal chassis, which is required to build it. It also does not come with tubes either. So they sent me this chassis. I'll put some links down in the description for a USA-based eBay seller that makes chassis for KLD tube amp kits. For the tubes, I just use some Electro Harmonix tubes. Just really good, budget-friendly, but really good sounding tubes, right? So I got some 7025s in the preamp stage. That's just a 12AX7 with slightly tighter tolerances. And then two 6L6 tubes for the power section. Really good sound out of those tubes, highly recommend them. I'll go ahead and put some links in the description for those as well as a link for this actual kit. All that being said, KLD sent me the DIY tube amp, they sent me the chassis, and then when I was building it, the first issue that I ran into once I unboxed it and tested to make sure all the capacitors were discharged, because this thing came to me directly from China. I have no idea if it's ever been powered on or not, so definitely discharged the capacitors before I did anything. Then when I was building it, I realized that pretty much none of the pre-drilled holes in this chassis aligned with the printed circuit board. Now, I know this is a relatively new kit for KLD, and this chassis is kind of a one-size-fits-all for all of their amp kits. And so my guess is that future chassis will probably have the proper holes drilled in them. But for me, I had to drill like 5 or 6 holes. Didn't take much time, but it was just something that kind of caught me off guard. As for actually building and soldering it, I would have had this done really quick if I was using the proper diagram to begin with. Okay, that's on me. When I went to the KLD website, I looked up a wiring schematic for this amp, and I accidentally grabbed the one for the hand-wired version, not the printed circuit board version. So when I was soldering my connections, there's about 45 connections you need to solder on the printed circuit board version of this amplifier. And I was able to follow the diagram pretty close. A lot of stuff wasn't in the place where it would, so I was using a lot of like resistor codes and different like capacitor values to try to figure out what part of the diagram I was supposed to be soldering to, or what part of the circuit board I was supposed to be soldering to, which made it take so much longer. Okay, I probably would have had this thing together in about an hour or 2 hours probably if I had followed the correct diagram to begin with. Now, also, I should mention, and this is really embarrassing, and I should have just reached out to KLD the moment that I was like, this diagram doesn't make sense, but I'm stubborn and I tried to figure it out. So I actually got 2 of the connections backwards, and the first time that I powered this thing on, it started smoking like crazy. And so of course I just unplugged it from the wall and opened up all the doors and windows of the house so I didn't set off any fire alarms and stuff. And I thought for sure that I just melted this thing, that it was just destroyed. And so I was so bummed out. So then I took it apart, I double checked all my connections. That's when I realized I used the wrong diagram. And so when I checked the proper diagram, I realized that I just needed to change those 2 wires, and went to go power it back on, and it worked beautifully. I think that's probably testimony to the quality of the circuit boards that KLD is using in these DIY amp kits. Okay, I soldered 2 wires incorrectly, and it probably could have caused a fire. It probably could have exploded. You know, it smoked like crazy, and then when I wired it properly, the dang thing still works, and it works really well. I'll go ahead and kick it on here for you. And as you can hear, oh yeah, I'm in drop D, sorry about that. The thing is super quiet. Okay, I'm using a humbucker right now. This is a single coil pickup. You can hear there's just a tiny little bit of 60 cycle hum in there. But when I use a humbucker, silent. Okay, even if I crank up the gain, just a little bit of hiss, you know? There's the bridge pickup. This is a much hotter. And man, just like a Marshall JCM 800, you get that awesome like buzz saw low end distortion, right? Super cool, super great sounding amp. But anyway, back to what I was saying. It's a very quiet amp. And again, this is testimony to how good quality the KLD components are in this because, like I said, I lit this thing up in smoke and it still functions just fine. It's plenty quiet. I thought I was gonna have issues like crazy because of my terrible wiring job the first time. But I'm shocked and amazed. This thing sounds awesome. All that being said, it's a super easy build given you follow the proper wiring diagram. So basically, if you want to get into building your own tube amp, this is a great place to start with the printed circuit boards because basically you're just following a wiring diagram. So if you know how to solder, like if you've wired a couple of guitars yourself, you're probably ready to try something like this. It's just a lot of soldering, right? 45 connections. Well, it's actually honestly not that much, okay? That's probably about double what you would do in a typical guitar. So really, the amount of time that you'd spend wiring this thing would be about the amount of time it would take you to wire 2 or 3 guitars. And so it definitely is a really good way to get your feet wet into this kind of stuff. Between the KLD amp kit and an actual Marshall JCM 800 are, well, one, the Marshalls come in a 50 watt and 100 watt version, and this is a 25 watt. This is kind of geared more towards like the home studio musician because in addition to only being 25 watts, there's actually a switch on the back that allows you to switch between pentodes and triodes, which essentially just cuts the wattage in half. And that's what I'm using it on right now. I'm using it on the triodes setting, which means that I can get that sweet tube gain at a bedroom volume level, more or less. It's still a bit loud. I mean, 25 watts, even cut in half, that's still more tube gain than you need for a bedroom, for sure. But kick it into full 25 watts and you're ready to, you know, hit a bar or a club. You'd have no problem blasting your guitar over a loud drummer with 25 watts of tube power. So the overall power, that's sort of the first difference. The other big difference between this kit and a real Marshall JCM 800 is that this one actually has an XLR direct output on it. So again, they're gearing it more towards the like home studio musician, not so much the plain like old school Metallica and arenas musician, right? So that's a pretty cool feature. But just like the Marshall JCM 800, you've got your normal and lead inputs. I'm playing all my sound demos on the lead inputs because I love just dialing in that gain to the sweet spot where you get kind of some clean tones when you play light. It sort of starts to break up once you dig in, and then you can crank the gain and again, just get that nasty chainsaw distortion that we're all so fond of when it comes to those Marshall JCMs, right? I don't know if you guys recognize this, but this is my C&G Thunder one-man band guitar, and as you can see, I've made a few upgrades as well as some wiring tricks. So if you guys are interested in seeing what I've done to this, let me know in the comments and I'll make an update video, but needless to say, I got this thing sounding killer and it's a super fun guitar to play. So, all right. Back to the sound demo. So for this sound demo, I'm playing through a Blackstar 12-inch 3/4 back cabinet, and I'm recording via a Sennheiser E609, one of my favorite low-budget guitar mics. Really great for live sound, okay for recording. There's probably some better ones for recording, but totally gets the job done. I love it. Into a Focusrite Scarlett USB interface directly into Logic. I'm doing no post-production EQ or effects. I don't have any effects pedals. This is all completely dry. All you're hearing is exactly the tone of this guitar. And I'm gonna blend in a little bit of the room mic that I have mounted on top of my DSLR there, just so you kind of get a feel for how this kind of sounds real life. overall, I gotta say, I'm really impressed with these KLD kits. Now, I don't know if you remember, but last year I reviewed the KLD Pilot 15, which is a clone of the Fender Hot Rod Deluxe. That thing sounded awesome. I love it. And this thing is no exception. I mean, it sounds awesome, and you can build it, really fairly easily. It's definitely a beginner level build. Honestly, what really sold me on it is the quality. I mean, I told you, I wired it up wrong. I sent the whole thing up in smoke. And then once I fixed the wiring, it still worked just fine. I wish that I had footage of it because it seriously was hilarious. Except I didn't think it was funny at all. I was like, goodness gracious, I'm gonna burn the house down. And this isn't even my house. Now the coolest thing probably about these DIY tube amps is that they cost so much less than their clones, okay? A Marshall JMC 800, I'm not even sure what they go for these days. At least between $1,000 and $2,000. And this kit runs you, I want to say $159 maybe, plus the cost of the chassis, plus the cost of the tubes. So you're probably looking, I'm guessing, at about $300 to build something like this. Obviously that comes in way below the cost, right? Now, if you're not a do-it-yourself person or you just don't have confidence in being able to build something like this yourself, KLD does offer their hand-wired amps pre-assembled. So you could buy their KLD JCM, not like hand-wired version, I think goes for like $250 or $300. So very cool that you can get that. If you're interested in me reviewing their pre-assembled hand-wired kits, I would love to. So let me know down in the comments and maybe I can work that out with KLD. I know they've got a clone of a Vox AC15 that comes pre-assembled hand-wired. I would definitely love to try. Definitely subscribe because as soon as that KLD DIY bass amp kit is available, you better believe I'm going to build and review it. Until next time, I'm Dan, this is Guns and Guitars, and I'll see you in that next video.